My name is Bronwen Maxson. I am a humanities librarian at University Library, and I worked in the field of immigration for about 6 years before I got my master's in library and information science, and I helped people from all different backgrounds and many different countries do all sorts of visas. Students and skilled workers, unskilled workers, investors, all sorts of that kind of good stuff. So I went to library school kind of wondering how to meld my background with librarianship, and I'm currently the World Languages and Cultures and the English department liaison for the library, so I work primarily with those programs, and my research centers around international students and research, and doing research and finding their way in a different academic system. And my colleague here?
My name is Honnor Orlando, and I am a little closer. I think it was on. Oh, I just need to speak up. Yes. Okay, and I'm an instructor for the English department in the English for Academic Purposes program. And the English for Academic Purposes program is specifically for international students who need some English support as they are entering into their field of study here at the university. So I teach mainly grammar and reading, but all of my students are international students. So I don't have a mix, I just have international students in my class.
So we were wondering, we wanted to know, a show of hands, how many of you have some limited experience working with international students? How many of you have regular experience working with international students? And how many of you, like, is primarily what you do? Okay. All right. So we have a good mix. In your folder, you'll find the two handouts that we'll be referencing. The one is an extended version of our slides with some extra goodies in there for you to check out. We won't be covering all of it today because of time. And the other one is the IUPUI Orientation Survival Guide. We will especially be looking at the last couple of pages. There's tips for working with international students, and then some major differences to be aware of on that last page. And then on the very back, what can you do to prevent misunderstandings? So those are some of the tips that we'll be touching on a little bit, and then this guide is for your reference as well. So at first we want to thank Sandra Lemons, who could not be here today. She created these slides, and we worked with her to adapt them. So she's very much the author of this, and she's the director of the Office for International Affairs. She's the director of Student Services. So we wanted to start with a brief talk on who is an international student. It's very important to keep in mind that there are no universal characteristics. The IU definition includes any student with a temporary U.S. immigration status. But then there are some students who are permanent residents who consider themselves international students, and others who reject that label. Another way to define international students is a student whose K through 12 education has been entirely outside of the U.S. And students without documentation also. Next door we've got a session on DACA students. So some DACA students would consider themselves international as well. We've got some numbers here. This is from 2015. We had an increase of 119% in international enrollment since 2005. And at that time, we had 147 different countries represented on campus, with India, China, and Saudi Arabia as the top three. And here are a few more current numbers. So the red is fall 2014, the yellow is fall 2015, and the blue is fall 2016. And the top three countries here are Saudi Arabia, China, and Mexico, followed by India, South Korea, and Malaysia. So our students are coming from very different parts of the world, very different cultures. And that just further illustrates that there are no universal characteristics. We can't lump them together as international students because they're coming from very different cultures. So we wanted you to have a little taste of what they go through. Take a moment to look at this form and imagine how you might fill it out. So it's difficult. We'll turn it around and see if it gets a little easier. So how many of you know the number of days until your Geburtstag? Right? So navigating possibly a different way of writing, different way of reading, navigating different cultural touchstones. This can be really disorienting for someone and very overwhelming in the first few days of being here. So we wanted to talk about stressors as well. Students will go through some initial culture shock. Hopefully you've all heard that term before, but going through a stressful process, like arriving in a new environment, can show up in a lot of different ways. And I will pick on myself for a moment. When I lived in Spain, I studied abroad, and then I moved back to teach English for a year and had to process some paperwork for my visa. So I took my photocopies of my application, everything I needed, down to the visa office. And the person who was helping me made me bring a certain number of copies. And they cost me some money. And I had just moved there, I didn't have a lot of extra money. She stamped all the different copies and then handed me a set back. And I was like, excuse me, I already have my own copies at home. And I was just thoroughly upset by this whole interaction. And really what it was just the stress of dealing in another language, different procedures, different processes, and I reacted very badly. So keep in mind if you are interacting with students and things are not going well, it might not be you, it might just be them just sorting things out. In a second language environment with U.S. Homeland Security requirements, my background would tell me that is not an easy, those are not easy requirements to navigate. Financial pressures, separation from family, and different cultural values as well. So it's important to avoid assumptions about students, and you can do that by getting to know the students. Ask a few questions. Where did they go to high school? Where do their parents live? Do they have any family in the U.S.? Start to get to know them a little bit. And find out if students are using campus resources. And recognizing differences can be really helpful. So I'm sure all of us in the room are aware of cultural differences, but taking a moment to step back from the situation and say, this student comes from a different culture. So, just because they're not engaged doesn't necessarily mean they're not engaged in the discussion doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. So instead of thinking that maybe the student is coming from a culture where they typically process the information silently and they show respect by not questioning the lecturer or their professor. And if you're not sure, ask the student. And use those differences constructively. So recognize that there may be cultural differences at play, and go ahead and discuss the difference. Don't be shy. And those handouts, again, are places where you can get a little bit more of an idea of what those differences can stem from. Find out what the student would like the final outcome to be. If they're upset about their grade, sit down with them and ask, what can we do to change the situation? How can we make this situation better for you? What can I do to support you? Where can we find you some help on campus? And that leads to step 4. So discuss those steps that the student can take. And keep in mind that it's not always just cultural differences. Sometimes it's just personality.
Some of you might be noticing that we're not following the hand out exactly. So we've given you a lot of more information than we're actually covering, so don't get too worried, but we do cover all, so just try to find where we are if you can. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about what you can do in the classroom more specifically. So the first thing is that cultural differences can affect student performance and success. So some of the main problem areas we might see are understanding your methods. Different cultures, different international or different education systems internationally might have different systems, so the students might become familiar with our system. Different assessment styles, different teaching relationships, so relationships with the teachers, relationships between students, the things that we do in our culture, in our education system may be very different than they're used to, so we should be aware of that as we are going through. Also assignments, including reading, writing, plagiarism comes up a lot with international students. Some cultures really value their master's works, and so it's respectful to be copying and borrowing from masters. But that's not something that obviously in our Western education system that we allow, so that's something that we sometimes have to continually remind them of because they have trouble understanding that. So I'm going to go just through some different parts of the class, different ways that there might be problems, things that you can do or that you might not want to do. And a lot of these tips that we're going to give you are universal. They're going to help your domestic students as well as your international students. But we'll just go through them. I'll highlight a couple, and they're probably not so new, but we just want to remind teachers that doing these universal techniques will make it easier for all your students. Avoiding slang. International students obviously have a lot of trouble with slang, have a lot of trouble with the cultural references. If you're talking about something that happened on your favorite TV show in the 90s, you talk about Friends, a lot of them aren't going to know those cultural references, so that's something that we should try to avoid. Or if it's an important reference, then you need to back it up with some explanation. Using clear visuals, giving PowerPoint copies, giving a lot of support for the students so that they can understand in a lot of different ways. Don't turn your back, of course, when you're speaking. Again, these are just universal techniques. The last one here, I think, is worth noting, though, also, is when you get stuck with a student, don't just say, what did you say, what did you say, what did you say, and have them repeat the same thing. Try to scaffold it in some way. If the student keeps repeating the same thing, exactly what they said, you're probably going to continue not understanding it. But if you repeat back to them the things that you do understand, so my example here is, I understand everything until the words be applied to. You know, what did you want? What is your question about being applied to? Can you repeat that last word, or can you rephrase it? Asking them more specific questions or some different questions instead of just asking them to repeat might be more effective in getting to the real communication. In-class discussion, first of all, this is something that maybe a lot of international students aren't familiar with. It's not something that they do normally in their education system. So make sure that you explicitly explain why discussion is important as a part of the learning that's going on in your classroom. Make sure you're including, as I had said before, any cultural background that's necessary, and even maybe integrate some international examples so that all students will be new to the discussion. So if you're in an economics class and instead of giving a local example for the students to discuss, then only the domestic students have the background to discuss it, you could use an example from some other country where all the students then would be in the same boat, basically, in discussing something that was a new topic for all of them. So no one would have any background to go from. So it's kind of an equal opportunity discussion. But then again, if it's a local example, if you're in a sociology class or something and you're talking about gay rights or the progression of gay rights in America, there's a lot of international students who have little to no information about that. So just introducing that topic is not going to be enough for them to really enter the discussion. So to help them get involved completely, it's good to give a lot of background information if necessary. What else here? Avoid calling on international, or don't avoid calling on international students just because you don't want to embarrass them or you're afraid that you want to understand what they're saying. Try to include all of them in discussion and get them involved. Group work. So again, this might not be something that international students are so familiar with, but again, just being explicit about why they're doing it, what the cultural expectation is, what the educational profit can be. Assigning groups that are mixed. The last step here, or the last point here, is that you shouldn't put all international students in one group. And does anyone have any ideas why? Why we shouldn't do that?
They really can't help each other.
Okay, absolutely. That's one thing, is that if a few of them are lost, then maybe one student who might kind of have an idea tries to lead the group, and then they're all lost together possibly, right? If they don't have a strong sense of what's going on, or what the assignment is, or what the project is, they're going to get lost together.
And it doesn't integrate them into the environment.
Exactly. So those are important things. Do you want something to add?
Yeah, you're just pushing the stereotype of segregation as well.
Exactly. All of these are important things to realize. So in some ways, it seems like, oh, they're going to understand each other better, so let's put them in a group. But really, it's better for them to get more integrated, to not segregate them, and to make sure that they understand better. So that's something that we should always try to group them with domestic students in projects. With assignments, really, it's the problem with assignments sometimes is just making clear what the assignment is. I work, as I said, with all international students, and I can't tell you how many times I say, I've told you so many times in class, but still, some of them are not going to get it. So the first, second, third time you say it, you should also have it in a written form that they're seeing, have it posted on your Canvas site. Just have multiple ways that multiple modes that they're getting the information, because that really will kind of cover all your bases to make sure that the international students are following along and are clear what's expected. Making expectations clear is really one of the key factors in assignments. So having them know what's expected and what the outcomes will be. Giving examples, that's something that's very important also. Giving models. Almost every assignment I give, I have to give them a model if it's something they haven't done before, something new. With reading, if you're giving students long reading assignments, pre-teaching some vocabulary is important, giving them glossaries possibly for your class, if you have new vocabulary that you are thinking that they may not be familiar with. Creating a glossary for your whole course. We have an example here that the library has created a library jargon glossary. If you want to go to that, the link is there. And also giving them a clear, again, expectations, clear goal for the reading. So telling them, you're doing this reading because you're going to be tested on it. Or you're doing this reading because you need to take notes and we're going to discuss it. Or you're doing this reading, whatever the goal is, make sure that they have a purpose for reading. That really helps them focus on how they read. That's one of the things that we teach them in my reading class, is make sure that you're reading with a purpose. We read differently, as we all know. If I'm reading a letter from my grandma that I'm going to throw away, or I'm reading an important email that I'm going to have to follow up on. So or a lesson in a textbook that I'm going to be giving a presentation on in class or something. So there's lots of different ways of reading, and students also need to be aware of those things. Assessment and feedback, again, just giving clear feedback is important. Giving students various opportunities to be assessed, not just one test. Try to make sure that they're giving you multiple ways to show what they know. Possibly giving them extra time if you think if they need it. Providing rubrics, again, that's just more models, giving them models and rubrics so they know what's expected. And the don'ts here, one of the don'ts is giving feedback such as like a question mark. When you're giving feedback on a paper, if you just put a question mark, a native speaker may have a sense of what that means, but the international student might just think, I don't understand what is unclear here. Or if you say, develop this idea, what idea exactly? So giving them more pointed feedback, more direct suggestions, leading them to know where they're missing something is important. And the last thing I'm going to mention is interacting with international students. So just, again, making your messages clear. So here are 3 examples of things that we might say in our classes normally, but that might be very difficult for international students to understand. So one example, ensure your essay draws on a wide range of sources to support your argument. Students might not know what the argument structure is if you haven't explained it explicitly. Ensure, that's a pretty academic word that some of them might have trouble with as well. So you might say this in your class, but then follow it up with like a restatement where you're saying something in a little bit easier way to make sure that all the students are following along, the international students as well. And the other 2 examples are similar. Excessive absences will be detrimental to your grade. Detrimental, what does that mean? They won't know, probably. So unless you give them a lot of context, or if you're not rephrasing, they might have trouble understanding.
Thanks. I'm gonna jump back one slide, and I just want to mention that the word sources as well is very confusing even for domestic students. Students tend to think research is all about finding an article that supports their perspective and plugging it into their paper, and boom, that's research. And so librarians often will have consultations with students, and we sit down and we really have to start with a very basic idea of what is research, why are we here, what does it mean to be curious and explore ideas, what does it mean to change your own worldview as you go through and do these readings. So even the instructions in your assignments that Honnor touched on a few moments ago, that is not a clear enough instruction even for domestic students. And those of us in this room are experts at research already. We've done it. We've gotten to this point in our careers where we've written plenty of papers, we've done presentations, but we forget how we got to this point of being an expert. And we assume that students come with the knowledge of how to do this. Not even our domestic students come with that knowledge. So, really, I would suggest thinking very thoroughly and deeply about those assignment instructions, but also consulting with whoever your subject librarian is on how to create clear instructions for the assignment. That's just a little plug for the library right there. But you should also be aware of your own culture. I moved here from Colorado, and boy, there is a culture difference here. So I think, at least in my own experience growing up, I thought, I don't really have a culture. I'm American, I don't really know where I come from. Well, I'm sure everybody in this room knows better. And as I grew up, of course, I realized I do have a culture. And it can be challenging for other people. It can be challenging when I go abroad. Learn about the educational backgrounds of international students. That's really easy to say. But when I mentioned earlier where our students are coming from, India and Mexico and Saudi Arabia, I did some research in grad school on plagiarism and academic integrity. And each culture, each country is different. So thinking about the makeup in your classroom, if you mostly have Saudi students, sit down and do a little research on academic integrity and Saudi students, because it's going to be different from Chinese students and Southeast Asian students, and even Spanish students for that matter. So really thinking about your own classroom, your own students, and figuring out what they're bringing with them, what knowledge, what experience, what habits, and what expectations they are bringing from their backgrounds. Again, be explicit in explaining differences and expectations, and modify your classroom practices where possible. So yes, it is going to take you a little bit of work, a little bit of reflection and thought, but that's going to create better outcomes for everyone. As Honnor mentioned, the domestic students will benefit as well. And despite the challenges, international students that they face, the majority are very highly motivated and successful. They have an average GPA between 2.9 and 3.0, and the retention is much higher than the national average and the Indiana average for domestic students. It's around 85%, where I think the national average is around 70%. And finally, we do have lots of campus resources. The EAP program that Honnor is a part of. They have an ESL tutoring center. Did you want to say anything about that?
The ESL Tutoring Center is something that we just started last year. It is to support the international students in all language issues that they have, not just writing. The Writing Center is very good at covering writing, and we are very small, so we would not be able to help all of our students with writing problems, but if there are reading issues or preparing for something, for presentations, or even just pronunciation, things are having problems with whatever it is, they can come to the ESL Tutoring Center.
Like, I don't know about this. Where's the
ESL
information for hours and?
The ESL Tutoring Center changes from semester to semester depending upon the hours in terms of who our staffing when our staffing is available. But it's in the EAP office, which is in Kavanaugh 341, and the hours are always posted on the door. So when the semester starts, we will have those posted.
And it's listed in the resource guide that we handed out today.
Oh, it is?
Oh, it
Okay.
is? Okay.
And it's, yes.
And I imagine it's on the liberal arts website somewhere.
I don't know if it's on our page
It's
yet.
on the EAP side.
It is on the
It's on the EAP site, okay. Well, we've mentioned the Writing Center. University College has mentoring programs as well. The Math Assistance Center offers some tutoring in other languages, something I didn't know. There are 2 locations of the Math Assistance Center and 2 locations of the Writing Center. One of each is in the library. There's CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services, for students who are having a difficult time adjusting. The OIA, the Office of International Affairs, they're really a great just point of contact for anything, and if they can't help you, they'll get you to the people who can. The Office of Student Involvement, there's a Multicultural Success Center as well. Do you want to talk about that? And then of course, librarians, subject librarians. We have online course and subject guides, and last year I developed some research tutorials for the English W130 EAP program, and got some very positive feedback from students about how to make them better, but also how they helped students understand the purpose of research and the mechanics of it, which can be really challenging. Yeah.
Could you make up a list, or if I gave you a list of all the gateway courses,
Mm-hmm.
could you connect us to our subject librarians, and I'll put that on
Oh,
the
sure.
gateway website?
Yeah. I can also, let me just go back to that. Oops. So on the library website, I'll just pull this up real quick and drag it over. Let me make it smaller here. So this is the glossary, which is found on the library website under the help. But if you go to the guides over here, the subject librarians are all listed by their discipline. So there's a subject liaison librarian for each school or department. So if you want to catch me after the presentation, I'm happy to tell you who your liaison is as well. And let's see, so we have some further reading. This is also available, this page is on the printout of the slides that you have, so you can check that out. And here is our contact information. So now we have a few moments for questions. Yes.
I didn't have a question, but it's something faculty feedback for international students. They can't read cursive, and they especially can't read teeny tiny cramped cursive, and it just adds that extra level of stress for them. So I know I print now, which is annoying for me, but at least they can read it. So just maybe, while you're making your instructions really explicit, make sure it's also legible so they can see what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. And it made me think of archival research as well, because a lot of our historical documents are written in cursive, so that can be challenging if students are doing research with primary sources.
Yeah, on the question of a group of international students working together, what would be your recommendation if students self-select to work in an all-international student group? I've had that in English 231, which requires a lengthy team project, and I just know they're going to struggle.
Well, we've talked about that quite a bit in the community of practice, the intercultural learning community of practice, and it's really important that you mix them up, that you say, no, this isn't going to work, because honestly, the domestic students benefit from having a diverse perspective in their group, somebody to see things a little bit differently, and it just benefits everyone. So
I think if you can just point out that it's for their own good, they might not want to be working with people they don't know, and they're more comfortable working with the people they know and that they think they can trust and they work well together. But I think from your experience, you can say, I really need you to be in different groups. Yeah, I think if you could just kind of strong arm them into the groups, or you don't give them the choice to work with who they want, you just create the groups at the beginning, that's a way to avoid it altogether.
And we read a really interesting article. So you all have this faculty resources guide, or resource guide, that we put together. On page 7, I think, the second language socialization through team interaction among electrical and computer engineering students. It was a really great article that talked about how students who were mixed up in groups for teamwork really blossomed and just learned so much and grew, both the domestic and the international students from those projects. So again, that's page 7.
I had the opportunity this semester to help with a common final for public speaking, and we did have some academic misconduct with some international students. So when students come here in their orientation, what's given to them about academic integrity?
There is a schedule. So I'm looking at this handout, the Working with International Students Orientation Survival Guide.
As she's looking through that, I'll just answer
Go ahead.
on the EAP level. All international students who come into the university, just as all students coming to the university, have to take at the very least, a minimum W-131. And we have EAP sections of 131 that we very clearly and explicitly teach about plagiarism and about avoiding plagiarism, if that's what you're speaking of. It sounds like academic integrity or copying off of other students. We talk about that in detail. So the information is being given. As I had said before, though, because they're coming from a culture, or possibly cultures, that don't understand that as well, or don't have that in practice, maybe they don't take it as literally as we mean them to, or also, just as there's domestic students who are going to try to get away with something, there's international students who are going to try to get away with something if they can. So I think both of those things are at play. So either some misunderstanding, even though it is taught explicitly, but I don't know, in orientation,
During their orientation week, I'm not sure what page number this is, I apologize, but on August 18th, they will have the U.S. Education Workshop as part of their orientation, and I know that is one of the topics covered, but we also have developed a tutorial in the library that you as an instructor could use, and I'll show you where that is real quick. My mouse will work. So Back on the library website here. Oops. Under guides again. So we have subject guides, course guides, and then we have these how-to guides. And we do have exploring academic integrity right here. And if you do want a quiz to go along with that, you would just have to contact your subject librarian. We can embed the tutorial and a quiz into your Canvas site, and you can have students go through it. It is a little text heavy. We are aware that it's not ideal for international students, so we are going to be working on that.
Just the other one, the academic integrity community of practice.
Yes.
Which is another topic area, is working on a quiz, and we've embedded a few questions into the new orientation for all students this summer.
Great.
So that'll be a start. But
And Sarah Lowe is a colleague
yeah,
in the library who is,
right, she's on that.
yeah, she's on that community of practice, and I work closely with her on this as well.
I think it's just important to remember that the only people who go through the international student orientation are those who are categorized in that way. So if you have a student who maybe went to university in Nigeria, but is an immigrant now, they still wouldn't be caught in that. So it's probably a good idea to just do this in general.
For everybody, yeah.
Yeah, for everybody, because there's going to be many students who are now U.S. citizens but did not go to school here.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks. Any other questions or final thoughts that you'd like to share with the group? I feel like we have a lot of knowledge in the room already about best practices.
Or we've seen bad practices.
Or yeah, that too. Well, thank you. We'll stick around if you have any questions for us.